Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for part two of a two-part series, Paving the Way to a Hydrogen Economy. This series is being co-hosted by the U.S. Energy Association's Consensus Program in partnership with Orrick, Herrington, and Sutcliffe. My name is Alex Krauke, and I'm a Seattle-based consultant for USCA working on our Consensus Program. And for those of you who don't know, the Consensus Program, established in 2008, seeks to build both domestic and international consensus on carbon capture, use and storage, and other carbon management technologies such as blue hydrogen, much of which we'll be discussing today. We do this through a series of activities, including briefings and webinars like today's, a series of reports, workshops, and a monthly news clips mailing that we send out to our stakeholders. If you are not on our email list, please feel free to email my colleague, Michelle Littlefield at mlittlefield@usca.org. A few logistical notes. We will be taking questions today. However, due to time constraints, we will most likely wait to answer them at the end of the webinar. If you do have questions or comments, please enter them into the Q&A box and please include who your question is directed towards. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording and copies of the presentations will be posted on our event page located at usca.org/events. Now, a bit of context for those who are new to the hydrogen world. And before we go into that, here is our agenda for today. Regarding context, why are we looking at hydrogen? It is another tool for decarbonization and particularly hard to decarbonize sectors such as fuel for aviation, maritime shipping, long-haul transportation. It can be used in manufacturing processes such as steel production and chemicals manufacturing. Hydrogen can also be an alternative to battery storage and electric vehicles reliant on rare earth elements and critical minerals. I think everyone is familiar with the dangers of relying on foreign sources of these materials. And many are familiar with the potential for environmental damage from mining for rare earths and critical minerals. So in the name of limiting a global environmental problem, you may be substituting for a local one. And additionally, you have the many foreign policy implications that I believe many are familiar with. So hydrogen can really be a more environmentally friendly substitute in some of these cases, both from a climate perspective as well as a local environmental perspective, and without the reliance on foreign adversaries for its success. Now, you may hear about different colors in relation to hydrogen. They can be helpful in the context of having a more nuanced discussion regarding the topic. So green generally refers to hydrogen produced with renewables. Blue hydrogen, which we'll be spending much of today discussing, refers to hydrogen produced with fossil fuels and carbon capture, use, and storage incorporated in those systems. You also have pink hydrogen for hydrogen produced with nuclear, as well as gray, brown, black hydrogen referring to hydrogen produced from fossil fuels without carbon capture. But to simplify things, a lot of times it's just referred to as clean hydrogen for hydrogen produced with a low to zero carbon footprint. So that is something to keep in mind as we move forward in the discussion. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to USCA's Acting Executive Director, Sheila Hollis, to give a few words on USCA.
Thank you so much, Alex, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us during these busy times. A few words about USEA. Of course, we're delighted and honored to have this outstanding panel and all of you joining in with this high-level conversation of the hydrogen-related issues and carbon capture. About USEA, we've been around about 100 years. We work in 104 countries over the years. We're a nonprofit, non-lobbying, nonpartisan organization, very unique. Most of our funding comes from the Department of Energy, the State Department, and USAID to perform services working throughout the world. Right now, we have many of our people deployed throughout the world, directly or indirectly, either directly as contractors at USEA or subcontractors that we work with in the scientific and management and oil and gas, electric power, transmission, storage throughout the world. And we started in 1924, but really things took off after the fall of the wall in the early 90s. And in addition to working in those USAID-oriented projects, we also promote and assist and help the Department of Energy and USAID and the State Department to put on programs like this one. USCA is busy at work despite the COVID. We're active throughout the world and honored and delighted to be able to sponsor, support, and engage with the public and with specialists on cutting edge issues such as this. It is a pleasure and an honor to join you today, and I know that my colleagues at the bar over the years are eager to get down to business here. So I will turn it back over to Alex and Charles and Peter, and you take it from here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sheila. And I'm Peter Connors, and welcome again to day 2 of this program. Once again, I'd like to express my well wishes to Michael Moore, who really worked for the last 2 months in putting together this program, and unfortunately got sick over the last couple of days. We do wish him a speedy recovery, and we hope he's listening to this program today. So yesterday we had 2 panels. The first was on the National Strategy for Hydrogen, and it was led by Frank Wolnick, who's president of the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association. And the second was on the role of electrolysis in developing the hydrogen economy. Both are very lively. We had 3 PhDs in total. Sheila commented earlier that it was a very cerebral panel, and you can imagine that with all these scientists, it was a very the focus of the panels was very scientific. I mean, it was a tremendous learning experience for me. My takeaway, I'm going to give you a couple of my personal observations regarding the panels. Regarding the National Strategy panel, much of the discussion was focused on the Princeton Zero America report, which was prepared by, or largely Chris Gregg, who was one of our panels yesterday. And my observations from his presentation were that speed and scale are going to be critical to develop the hydrogen economy. Government involvement, particularly bipartisan government involvement, is important, and that is why this development of a national strategy is so critical. In the US today, and in fact globally, the supply and demand for clean hydrogen is at a very early stage at development. The projections in terms of the amount of hydrogen and the percentage of the energy use that hydrogen will account for are really astronomical. Social acceptance of hydrogen is relatively low. People are concerned about safety. When we talk about electric vehicles, people don't really think about fuel cell powered electric vehicles. There has to be better messaging, I would say. And one of the critical things in terms of the development of the national strategy is the role of the national hubs, which are envisioned by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. And they will be important in moving the projects and technologies forward. And there was a considerable debate yesterday as to whether fewer larger hubs or smaller to medium sized hubs would be more advantageous. We then had another panel. Our second panel was on the role of electrolysis in the hydrogen economy. And my takeaways, my observations from that panel as follows. There's a role for a variety of forms of electrolysis in the production of hydrogen, including alkaline electrolysis, proton exchange membrane electrolysis, and several additional emerging technologies. Technology, manufacturing, investment, and supply chain will be important factors in increasing hydrogen production. The CapEx costs in developing large-scale electrolysis plants are very significant, but they will come down in time. The cost of energy is an important factor in getting to $2 a kilogram, which is the number targeted by the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. The production tax credit, which we'll be talking about later, which is a part of the Build Back Better bill, would be very helpful in the production of hydrogen, but it is not the end-all be-all solution. More universal carbon reduction incentives would achieve the same goals with less distortion in the hydrogen market. And finally, time is of the essence. Perfection is the enemy of the good. We can't spend too much time debating the perfect rollout, but rather we need to start building some large projects to provide market certainty for electrolyzer developers and proof of feasibility at scale for project developers. So, again, it was a very good discussion, very focused. We had, just superb panelists. So I think we should now move into today's program. And our keynote speaker is Chuck McConnell. Chuck is the Energy Center Officer of the Center for Carbon Management and Energy at the University of Houston. And prior to joining the University of Houston, Mr. McConnell was the Executive Director of the Energy and Environment Initiative at Rice University. Mr. McConnell served as the Assistant Secretary of Energy in the U.S. Department of Energy from 2011 to 13, and was responsible for the Office of Fossil Energies, Strategic Leadership, Budgets, Project Management, Research Development, and Development of the Department's Coal, Oil, and Gas, and Advanced Technologies programs, as well as for the operations and management of the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve and the National Energy Laboratories. Prior to his role at DOE, Mr. McConnell served as Vice President of Carbon Management at Bechtel Energy Technology in Columbus, Ohio. In the first 32 years, Mr. McConnell's career were at Praxair, serving in a variety of operations, sales, and global business and technology roles involving hydrogen, gasification, and energy as the Global VP of Energy and Hydrogen. Chuck, the podium is yours.
Well, thanks, Peter. And Sheila, thank you for your opening remarks. I can recall my time at DOE, and the relationship we had with USEA was always superb, and it continues to be so. So congratulations in your leadership and bringing programs like this to the marketplace. Appreciate that. And the opportunity to be part of this conversation today. Peter, you made some opening remarks about the quality of the panels yesterday, and that they were populated with scientific PhDs. And I'm hoping that today's panel doesn't let you down in that regard, because we're likely to be spending a bit more time talking about the commercial aspects of hydrogen as opposed to the scientific aspects. Not that they're separate and distinct, but I think you'll get that kind of a flavor from this group today. The other question, I guess, the other concept that was posed is, is it time for the government to step up? Is it time for the marketplace to step up? And I guess I would just add the answer to that is yes. They both need to be involved in working in that public-private partnership that's always made a big part of the energy success story in the United States. I just maybe tell a little story to get started in terms of the marketplace and the history of things. And it's a personal story, actually, because I actually moved to Houston in 1992 and was asked to take over the hydrogen business at the time for Praxair. This hydrogen business had about 7 or 8 customers and about 50 miles of pipeline. And it was about a $50 million a year business. And it was an opportunity for a young guy to get a chance to run a business and try to make something of it. And from the standpoint of the scope of the hydrogen business in 1992, you can fast forward through the 1990s when a series of legislative actions took place by the EPA talking about tailpipe emission standards for automobiles and the need for gasoline to have the sulfur taken out. And of course, hydrotreating, hydrocracking, and all those types of technologies then became the rage in terms of the refining industry to implement these new technologies. A tremendous capacity of hydrogen that was required to be supplied to meet those new expectations. And of course, government regulations really drove the marketplace and the performance of that. And so by 2005, that $50 million a year business had grown to approximately $700 million a year, just in that short period of time. The length of pipe approaching some 500 to 600 miles from that original 50 miles, and the customer list was 30 to 40 deep. And so you see how that transition occurred over time, but nonetheless an exponential growth of opportunity. And you can fast forward to today, as that hydrogen business continues to grow, that today for Praxair, now Linde, is well over $1 billion a year business. It's over $1 billion a year business as well for Air Liquide, for Air Products, the industrial gas business in general. And today's market is about 13 billion cubic feet a day, much of it provided over the fence by industrial gas companies, but largely provided by companies that are producing their own hydrogen for their own needs. So it's about a 50-50 split. So the volumes over that timeline, and fundamentally the hydrogen characteristics and how it's changed. Initially it was really used more for chemical processes prior to the 1990s in the chemistry of organic chemistry, construction, and a lot of the chemicals industry. And then as the refining industry became more and more of a consumer, and then over time, looking at hydrogen as a fuel and a fuel replacement. And so as you look at the future of hydrogen, where is it going and why, and the definition of what clean hydrogen will be, I think there's a few things that we need to keep in mind in terms of why hydrogen will continue to grow. And by the way, it's a 13 billion cubic feet a day market today. And there are projections that it will be 5 to 10x that size by 2050. Now, that's a remarkable volume increase. And so there'll be remarkable transitional technologies that will be required, infrastructure, et cetera. But it tells you that the marketplace has a big demand. And what will drive that? Well, certainly transportation fuels, looking at hydrogen powered vehicles, et cetera, whether it's light or heavy transportation for long haul trucking, et cetera, fuels for ships and container vessels around the world, just the fundamentals about decarbonization of petrochemicals and fuels themselves. But I would argue the single largest draw for the increased volumes will be alternate fuel. And what I mean there is replacement fuel for the tremendous volume of natural gas that's being consumed in industries, in the petrochemical industry, refining industry, steel manufacturing, et cetera. There's a tremendous amount of steam that's raised in all of these production facilities. That fuel today is natural gas. That gas, when it's combusted, vents CO2, and there's a tremendous amount of CO2 emissions that come from that. In theory, if we are able to meet the capacity requirements of hydrogen to replace that natural gas as a fuel for steam and thermal requirements within these facilities, that's really going to be the big driver in terms of volume and the pace at which it's replaced. And then you would ask, well, then what will be the driving force? And it's very likely to be these many companies that are using natural gas in their fuel headers today have made pledges of being net zero by 2050, have responded to shareholders and the pressures of the marketplace, et cetera, and the investment community, not necessarily directly government, but certainly as a part of governmental activities in the court of public opinion globally. There's a tremendous pressure to reduce emissions at sites. And those scope 1 and scope 2 emissions will be directly impacted by the replacement of natural gas by hydrogen. Now, we talked a little bit coming into this discussion around the difference between blue and green hydrogen. And of course, blue hydrogen being produced by fossil fuels, largely natural gas, through a process called steam methane reforming. But of course, that process does generate carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And for it to be blue hydrogen, it needs to also be incorporated with carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Additional capital needs to be put onto the facility. That carbon needs to be captured, transported, and ultimately stored safely and permanently. The advantages for blue hydrogen come in the fact that the feedstock and fuel in the United States certainly are abundant in terms of natural gas supply and cost. And the essentials for blue hydrogen is that CCUS be made a part of it, and that the scale of that kind of investment warrants that type of investment in terms of the carbon capture and ultimately the CCUS, the transportation network that's going to be necessary to actually transport the CO2 once it's produced. And then, of course, that all relies on the fact that there's proximal and suitable geology for the storage of the CO2. Now, that can be contrasted with what many talk about as green hydrogen, produced from renewables, largely electrolysis units, et cetera. And of course, the key essentials there are that you have an adequate supply of water, and not just any water, but water that's also desalinated. As you look around the world in terms of water supplies, et cetera, and where this hydrogen requirement will be, a lot of it is very near coastlines, and the availability of fresh water or desalinated water will be incredibly important. That will drive the demand for electricity, not only for desalination, but for the electrolysis process itself. And so it's a step change in the amount of electricity demand. And as we look at the world's demand for electricity likely doubling over the next 40 years, to put on top of that the electrolysis demand necessary to produce hydrogen, it becomes an even more challenging task to have an adequate supply of electricity that is reliable, that is dependable, and that it performs 24/7. Leaning into the conversation around renewable electricity being the source of energy for these electrolysis units, it will be necessary to have base load electricity to produce that hydrogen on a regular basis. And of course, then that gets to the cost. And today, from electrolysis units, at the scale that we're looking at today, it's a significant expense above and beyond fossil fuel produced hydrogen. Now, albeit it does not produce CO2, but in comparison to fossil fuel product with CCUS on the back end, there's still a tremendous cost advantage for the blue hydrogen with today's technologies. We talked a little bit about the hydrogen economy and what does it mean, and maybe more importantly, as you look at the past, we've had moments in this country where we've talked about the hydrogen economy. I think we can all recall Bush 43 declaring that it was time for us to move into the hydrogen economy. And frankly, I can remember very strongly one of my big customers at the time was BP, talking about going beyond petroleum. And at the time, and again, just a little story as an aside, we opened a hydrogen fueling station with an electrolysis unit at the LAX airport in 2000. And we had a grand opening. Actually, Governor Schwarzenegger was there to have his Humvee fueled with hydrogen. It was a pretty exciting day. We were all excited about it. But the Humvee itself, with all of the fuel cell equipment, was a cool $750 million vehicle. And you start thinking about that, and wow, the cost of a unit like that, $750,000 for that one unit. And so, you know, you look at the step change of technology, you look at the step change of not only the production of the hydrogen, but the actual consumption of the hydrogen. big change. Of course, beyond petroleum, maybe was a little ahead of its time, but we are where we are today, primarily because market demand for decarbonized hydrogen is there. It's not government mandated. It's really mandated now by the demands of the marketplace and the investment community. It's societal. It's what people are looking for as we move forward, and it will be important to meet the needs of society. Technology changes have occurred, a lot more coming, certainly, but that's really going to be the challenge as we're moving forward. And really from the standpoint of the companies that I referred to earlier, the marketplace and where the real demand's going to come from, they're under pressure to eliminate scope 1 and scope 2 emissions right now in terms of their ability to take CO2 out of the atmosphere and operate their facilities differently. That will require fuel substitution in a big way for anybody to have an opportunity to approach net zero. Hydrogen hubs, we're going to talk a little bit about that during our panel. And what does that mean in terms of how it can support the marketplace, how it can support this governmental change and the expectations that we have going forward. So we have a couple of great panelists that are going to join me here from Baker Botts. First, we have a gentleman named Jason Bennett, who's a partner and department chair for Baker Botts Global Projects, gets involved with financing energy projects and with the proviso that they're clean energy projects. And Jason, we're going to ask you what the definition of that is here in just a moment, because I think everybody's got maybe a little bit different call on that. But that can be clean hydrogen, it can be ammonia, it can be CCUS. And of course, developing those projects and finalizing financial structuring, a big part of that. And ultimately, also, Jason, we're going to ask you about your types of clients that you're serving, whether that's VC customers or private equity or infrastructure funds or the institutional investors. There's a lot of different appetites. There's a lot of different sources and uses of capital. I'm sure you see a lot from your view, and it's quite a difference in that marketplace. So we'll be interested in those thoughts. And joining Jason is Tom Holmberg. He's also a partner at Baker Botts in the global energy practice. He's co-chair of their LNG, hydrogen, and CCUS subgroup, and gets involved, as Jason does, in a lot of the financial structuring of projects and also looking at regulatory frameworks for hydrogen production and transport, et cetera. So we're blessed to have both of these folks with us. And maybe I can start with you, Jason. I'll go back to that fundamental entry question. How do you define clean energy in terms of your projects?
So, I mean, as a guy who grew up in the natural gas business and been around it a long time, when I think about natural gas and the role that it plays, I tend to think of it as not just a cleaner fuel, but a way to clean fuel when you look at it as exporting, and replacing coal, replacing dirtier fuels. But I think the most common way to look at this has become just low carbon framework. I think it's the way everyone looks at fuels now, or really at energy of any form. Is not what is the energy form, because it could be electricity, it could end up being steam, but where did it come from, and what's the carbon content of the energy? So when you're talking about hydrogen, right now, you're talking about low carbon hydrogen. We just don't bother to say it every time, so it get very clunky. No one's talking about more hydrogen, which is, as it's currently made, the source of 6% of the world's CO2, right, is from making of gray hydrogen and the colors you talked about. So what everybody's saying is low carbon. And what does that mean? Well, it means different things to different people. And the different lobbies for green hydrogen and blue hydrogen have different viewpoints on, what is the ultimate goal? Are we trying to have a carbon-free fuel? Are we trying to reduce carbon in fuels? Or, what's good enough? And, even if you're looking at electrolysis, doesn't have to be, green hydrogen just because it's electrolysis. You have to look at the power source. And, this goes into the whole scope 1, 2, 3 analysis. Where is this coming from and how's it made? And I think that's really ultimately what most people are talking about when they say it's clean or it's green. It's clean ammonia, it's green hydrogen, it's low carbon fuel, low carbon LNG. They're really talking about the intensity of the scope 1, 2, 3. Well, some people are talking about scope 1, 2. Some people are talking about scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions that arise from the making of that product.
Well, I talked a little bit about customers and what's going to drive that marketplace. And Jason, Tom, maybe you can both reflect on this. What do you see out there in terms of your client base? Are you working primarily with consumers, producers, a little bit of both? And where do the transportation guys, the distribution guys fit in that equation?
Tom?
Sure, I'll kick this off. And if I want to thank you all for having us this afternoon and for watching this. It's a pleasure to be on this panel and to talk to everybody. In terms of the number of projects we're seeing and what we're seeing in terms of the clients that come knocking on our door about hydrogen, I would say that the majority of the clients are on the production side of it, or consumers that are participating in the production side of it. By the time you come to somebody like Baker Botts with help for a project, it's usually a rather large size project. So most of the projects we work on are kind of world scale projects. And we're seeing a mix of both green and blue hydrogen projects. In North America, I'd say that the number of blue hydrogen projects outweighs the number of green projects, but many of these are pretty large scale. We're talking anywhere from 180,000 tons a year to 1.2 million tons per year, and even north of that for some projects that are confidential. Jason, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, remember, carbon capture has a life completely outside of hydrogen. It's a big part of blue hydrogen, but it has its own drivers and its own life. We have a pretty large group of people that cover energy from different angles. And so we get real estate, we get tax, we get environmental permitting, we get incident response. We got a whole bunch of people, energy regulatory. And so in our teams, what we're really seeing is people coming at this from the technology side. Our intellectual property group sees a lot of people looking and trying to patent different technologies and improvements. And we're looking at the acquisition side. So when we talk to private equity, we talk to money players, institutional investors, the number one question we've been asked over the last 2 years is, what is investable? Not what, but when. Okay, let's say you're right. Like, oh, the hydrogen economy is coming. Awesome. When can I invest something and get something? And how's that going to look? And really the customers, the people that are consuming hydrogen right now, it's just the refiners and the ammonia producers. There's very small consumer production of hydrogen. There's obviously some companies that are involved in fuel for forklifts and for heavy machinery, but it's a tiny sliver of the market. So there's this chicken egg thing going on. It plays out in our customer base just like it does everywhere else, which is, I'll switch to hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, when there's some low carbon hydrogen. And the low carbon hydrogen producer says, I'll produce as much low carbon hydrogen as you want. Just where's the demand for the low carbon hydrogen, and what am I going to get paid for this more expensive process? And really the key to linking all that up is trying to find a way to transition the market to large scale production. So when Tom and I are both project development lawyers by trade, and we think in timelines and project development and spin curves and budgets and, long periods of time where you're going to spend, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to build something, and in 4 or 5 years it'll be ready. So how does the chicken and egg thing play out here? Well, our clients who are looking at the large scale projects Tom was talking about are saying, look, we'll find customers who will be ready for it in 4 or 5 years, and we'll sign them up to buy it in long-term offtake in 4 or 5 years. And that'll give us the impetus to invest now to build the large scale project So it'll be ready in 4 or 5 years. And that works if you've got creditworthy customers and long-term offtake and a whole bunch of things that you need for a large-scale project. How does that look in smaller projects like green hydrogen? It means private equity, it means VCs, it means smaller companies doing niche projects for particular customers on site, backup battery power or small scale generation, things like that. And so whether we're seeing the industrials are talking about it, obviously those consuming right now, consuming hydrogen are thinking about at what point will I be incentivized by tax credits, tax breaks, or by environmental regulation, or by a carbon tax, disincentives to switch and try to move towards it. And if I do, even if I want to, when's it going to be ready? So sorry to give you probably a lot more than you wanted on that one, but we see all those people talking to us coming in the tax store, coming in the real estate angle, carbon capture for this blue hydrogen. You have to have a mass real estate program for pore space. And so we see, real estate clients, we see permitting people coming in, we see people looking at class 6 wells that take like 6 years to permit, coming and talking to us. And and the LNG projects that are trying to reduce their carbon content, they're doing carbon capture or looking about or thinking about carbon capture projects that they're associated with. It's not for hydrogen, but once you have the carbon capture and you have a place to put it, guess what else you can do? You can do a lot more blue hydrogen. So these two, you have to remember, these are like, binary stars kind of circling each other a bit. And every time you get improvement in carbon capture, you have more possibility for blue hydrogen. Anyway.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd say a couple of other things. First of all, Jason's heard this joke a lot, that when we first started talking to people about this about 2 years ago, it was a lot like, the first song at the junior high dance. Everybody was in the gym and the music was playing and the little silver ball was spinning, but nobody was on the dance floor. Everybody's up against the wall, right? And we're starting to see more people kind of jumping on the dance floor at an accelerating pace. And it hasn't quite played out the way that we thought it would when we first kind of launched our practice. When we saw these kind of rumblings about the industry. And I think the most surprising thing was we launched initially a hydrogen and carbon capture practice because we saw the carbon capture as being really ancillary to a necessary component for what we thought was going to be most of the hydrogen development in North America. A lot of the action has really been, as Jason noted, separate kind of independent carbon capture development, because people see opportunities beyond the hydrogen space, although they do see those opportunities there. And then we've also seen, a surprising number of purely green hydrogen opportunities, even in North America. Which was a little bit more than I would have expected, because we originally thought that most of the development, I think you can still say most of the development, we thought that almost all of the development on large scale projects is going to be from blue hydrogen, but that has not necessarily been the case.
Just an observation, I guess. I've been away from the industrial gas business for 10 years, but customers will tell you a lot of things. But at the end of the day, they're willing to pay for whatever they're willing to pay for and whatever their competitor is coming up against it. I don't see a lot of price signaling today that says I'm ready to pay a premium for blue hydrogen. But that's just an observation. I'd be interested in you reflecting on that and whether you see that there's movement there. But maybe another question to pull on what you just said, Tom. Those small units, those electrolysis units, I guess, that you're speaking about in those discrete projects. And by the way, everybody's not near CCUS opportunities, so you have to look at it that way, right? Do you find them largely chasing government grants associated with it so that these projects can get a foothold, or are they holding their own on their own?
I would say that we have seen fairly recently some rather large projects that are not dependent on government funding to move forward, and even some smaller developers that are not necessarily relying on government funding. In my view, the government funding, particularly the funding that's set out in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, there's some R&D and some pilot projects, and that's all nice to have. And that might even help de-risk some projects in the early stages. But serious developers out there are looking at other things on a more holistic level in terms of what makes the market look good for the development of a hydrogen project. And it's not just the government kind of bits and bob funding that's out there for a lot of the hydrogen projects, even the most recent legislation. So what is driving it? You're going to hear more about the tax credits, that are available, and possibly, for carbon capture, which helps with respect to blue hydrogen, and other drivers such as ESG drivers, which are kind of the private initiatives and the net zero pledges that companies and governments are undertaking around the world. There's kind of a perfect storm of circumstances that are kind of driving these hydrogen projects, but it's certainly, I would say that the government funding is really a small portion of it.
At this time.
Jason, just to pull on that a little bit, Jason, where do you see the desire or the capability or the want to pay a little bit more for that blue hydrogen? Or are we there yet?
I think we're getting really close. It's moved a lot faster than we would have thought. So there's at least like three things I think that are going on. Companies at one level, especially traditionally oil and gas companies, let's say, forget what they're labeling themselves, they're all changing their names now, but like what business have they been in? What are the bulk of their assets? If they have hydrocarbon related assets and their company says, I want to make a net zero pledge, or just makes it, the business team has to scratch their head and say, well, how do we decarbonize hydrocarbons? That's a tough one. We're going to have to really think hard about how to decarbonize hydrocarbons. So what they're trying to do is reduce, emissions and flaring. And then they're looking for the few of the only things you can decarbonize. And one of them is hydrogen, right? Mm-hmm. So if you use it in a lot of your processes, especially at a refinery, but everywhere in the fuels business. And if you can decarbonize that, so I said that could be a large part of your emissions profile as it stands. So that's, a lot of it is internally driven. These companies saying, we're going to do this, and we're going to get rid of, methane emissions and flaring, and we're going to focus on some things that'll do some real good. And this is a way where we can make it as clean as we can make it. And then there's niche projects you can bring into that with renewable natural gas and try to replace some of your base load. And you can do some different things that you're trying to do, but you could make a completely carbon neutral fuel, with hydrogen if you produce enough of it. But when it comes to the existing customers, I think that's a piece of it. I think those companies, are probably trying to figure out what is the best way to do it. And they're pushing for, government incentives, a production tax credit, like been thought about in the Build Back Better plan, or an ITC, investment tax credit, where, obviously you get like government subsidy for producing clean hydrogen. But I think a lot of it is also thinking about the future. Like, as when building anything large piece of kit, you can't need something today and get it today. If you need low carbon hydrogen, you better start today. And 5 or 6 years from now, you may get it. So the idea is, well, if the customers fear that regulations or carbon controls or customer backlash or board action or, make the list will happen against their company if they don't make these moves, not today, but a few years from now, then the time to start looking at it is today. I know a lot of companies have made announcements of large scale projects, some of them just for clean ammonia exports, which goes to, Asia, principally Japan, Korea, who are very interested in replacing, elements of natural gas or other, places like coke and steel with hydrogen, which you can transport very readily through ammonia. But some of them are talking about serving the natural hydrogen market here, because the customers, when they look at their contracts, say, ooh, this contract says you can just charge me whatever you want if the hydrogen maker, suffers any taxes or any costs. And that's really what those contracts pretty much say. All of them, whoever the IGC is, that's what they say. And so the customers are thinking, better we chart a course for ourselves for the future, make our requirements known to the suppliers, and get back price bids and start this process than just let it fall right on us and see what happens.
10 years ago, that might have been a very chilling message for me to receive as an industrial gas supplier, but certainly it is part of the changing world that we're looking at. I mean, I was going to ask really both of you to reflect on the fact that, given the complexity here of needing to produce more hydrogen, having a CCUS network, all these things that we're talking about, they're really sort of required to take the bull by the horns themselves, as opposed to waiting for suppliers to show up or venture capital companies or something like that. It just seems to me to be, you better have your hand on the stick of your own destiny. Does that make sense, Tom?
Well, I think so. It's interesting because we've talked to developers out there who said that, they had been, pushing on the rope of a hydrocarbon development for years, and then they started looking at clean hydrogen projects, and their phone is ringing off the hook. And we've talked to other companies that have that produce gray hydrogen for certain industrial processes, and their phone is ringing off the hook by people that want to do carbon capture and want to act as carbon sequesterers and aggregators for these people. And so I think what we're looking at, Chuck, is almost a point of inflection where if there's enough momentum that's generated and these projects start to really get off the ground and have some legs, there's going to be a fundamental change in the industries. The industrial gas companies will still have a role. They'll be out doing what they've always done and probably expanded, but it's going to look very, very different. They're going to have to change the way they do business in a lot of ways. And your point about a premium for clean hydrogen is a really interesting one, because I think that the different uses of hydrogen, right now, hydrogen and one of its primary carriers, ammonia, those are commoditized markets in a lot of places, particularly ammonia, right? And it's hard to differentiate a clean product from a not clean product or not low carbon product. But the uses are going to vary so greatly that depending on where you are, the price is going to vary tremendously widely. Simply because of the huge growth in the opportunities, uses, and production of hydrogen, both in the United States and around the world. So right now, it's a frothy sea we're in right now. There's just so much activity that it'll be interesting to see where it shakes out.
Well, I want to jump in on that a little bit, because I think a lot of this goes back to, who do you think is going to consume all this hydrogen? Are we just going to replace the current hydrogen we're using? Are we going to grow vast new wings or small niche products, or both, or different time scales, or whatever, of new hydrogen consumers? Because the answer to how this will happen really depends on that question. And so it goes back to what's really driving it? Why are we doing any of this? Why are we even talking about hydrogen? It's more expensive to make new lower carbon hydrogen than existing hydrogen, no matter what, even though there's projections that in the future and very future times, after much investment, you'll get costs down and there'll be a lot better cost for electrolysis and green hydrogen. Okay, but why would we start doing this if that's the case? Well, I think the answer is, if you look at the story of decarbonization, you can decarbonize a lot of things in the energy sector with renewables and batteries of different sorts. You can get a lot done, right? There's a limit. 80% of everything we consume in the US is a fuel, right? The end consumption, we consume fuels, not power, right? 80% of all energy used. Let's say electrification goes wild and it grows by 50%. All right, so now only 70% of everything we consume is a fuel. Of the things that use fuels, how much of them can really be replaced by renewables and batteries? And remember, we're struggling to have enough renewable power for all the electrification uses, the electricity uses right now, because of land use, because of investment speed, because, everyone's, they want to build as many as they can, even at a low rate of return, but there's just not enough of it. Now we're talking about a competitor, like somebody else that wants to enter to use mass amounts of renewable power, right? What can they replace? Well, they can't replace all of it. About the numbers we've seen are about half of the deep decarbonization market is entirely hydrogen. Why? Because hydrogen is probably the only thing in the low carbon era and low carbon segment that can replace a fuel effectively. Now we're doing something in passenger cars and people are fueling at their house using batteries, but you can't do that with trucks, or at least not with today's generation of batteries, because if you tried to, the battery would take up like a third of the truck and it would weigh twice as much. And both of those things are bad for over the road transport. So the real question, so it's not going to be, renewables are going to be able to push decarbonization to a point, right? And there's this huge point afterwards. And one of them is heavy transport, and there's building heating, and there's a whole bunch of industrial uses that you need a fuel. And that's what hydrogen can really do. So you tell me how far we're willing to take it with decarbonization as a goal. And that will be the answer for hydrogen. And then the uses of it really depend on where are you. You hit on this, Chuck, earlier, like hydrogen is an element. It is not natural gas. It's not a molecule. It's not easy to contain, right? And so when you shrink natural gas by liquefying it and get it much more dense, you lose 6 to 9% of it ish, in most liquefaction plants. You lose about half on hydrogen. So and it doesn't really get very dense either. It gets more dense, but not really so much. So hydrogen, and when it actually gets into steel and brittles it, I'm sure a lot of people know this, it's really hard to contain. It's very explosive. That's not a bad thing. I mean, all fuels, to be valuable at all, are explosive. That's what makes them a good fuel. They explode and create energy. So that's, but when it's tough to contain and it explodes and you lose a lot of it, the key to hydrogen is you need to produce and consume it very close to the same place. You do not want to transport. You don't want to handle it so much. You can in small quantities, like for filling stations for trucks, but for large industrial purposes, like refineries, you want to produce it as they do now, at or near site. And so some of those are going to be right close to natural gas pipelines and have carbon capture facilities that are reasonably close by. Some of them will not. So there's like this role for green and role for blue. In transport, it seems, because our fueling station system in the US is so diverse and spread out, green hydrogen seems to have a really nice fit for some markets where it's efficient to have renewables because you can produce it in a distributed fashion. In other markets, it might be better to truck it. And so I think there's going to be this diversity of solutions, and it has a lot to do with cost, but it also has a lot to do with what is hydrogen? How do we use it? How do we consume it? And it also has to do with scale, because if you need a lot of it, you need a lot of renewable power. Forget about cost. Let's say you just decided green hydrogen is the path forward. That's what we're doing. We're going to replace all the hydrogen in every refinery in the US with green hydrogen. The number Tom and I have heard is you would almost have to double the renewables generation capacity in the United States to get that done, just to replace, no new economy, no new uses, just to replace it. And there's just not enough space, and you're competing with other uses for renewables. And so it seems to us there's going to be a diversity of uses based on scale and of course on cost. And, those are all driven by which consumers want it the most. And it seems like heavy industry, trucking, heavy transport, these are going to be natural markets. It's not necessarily passenger cars. I think that's a bit far off, and power generation, which even seems farther off.
That might be a little bit about what you were talking about, Tom. It seems as if there's an awful lot of projects being identified for green hydrogen of a scale and size where it would not necessarily be integratable into some sort of a network for blue hydrogen, but it would really stand on its own, a fueling station or a location out in wherever that would require hydrogen generation. the size and the amount of those projects probably getting a lot of momentum right now. But if you look along the Texas Gulf Coast as an example, I would suspect you're probably seeing most of those folks looking at blue hydrogen. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think so, Chuck. You know, if you look along the Gulf Coast or places where there's a lot of opportunity for blue hydrogen, many of those projects are intended to be export projects, right? You know, projects which can use the vast natural gas resources we have in North America, combined with carbon capture. There are a lot of opportunities to do that in the Gulf Coast as well, and create an export project, but typically not hydrogen, but ammonia, right, into the ammonia market, primarily for uses either fertilizer or, as many people watching know, Japan in particular is looking at replacing a lot of their natural gas and coal thermal generation with ammonia power generation or hydrogen power generation. So yeah, a lot of those large projects are blue projects. We have seen some really substantial green projects, particularly overseas. For example, the NEOM project in Saudi Arabia is a 4 gigawatt, 1.2 million tons per annum ammonia export project. I mean, that's really big. But a lot of the ones we're seeing here in the United States, the green ones are a lot smaller. We've seen some that are for export, but a lot of the other ones are exactly kind of like what Jason mentioned, you know, producing close to where they're being, where the anticipated consumption is going to be, kind of a hub and spoke, or the hydrogen node model, where you have renewable resources nearby, or you can buy from a renewable supply inside the project near where the hydrogen is going to be used. And those, we're seeing lots of those types of green projects. Another model that's popping up everywhere is producing green hydrogen from renewable natural gas, right? Renewable natural gas projects are popping up everywhere like mushrooms, and a lot of folks and developers are looking at making hydrogen out of those too. But given the distribution issues associated with hydrogen and renewable natural gas, because even though there's a large natural gas transportation network, a lot of the sources for renewable natural gas aren't necessarily connected to that. Those are also likely going to be very localized projects as well.
Yeah, you mentioned transportation. I mean, just an off the cuff thought here is there's over 1,000 miles of hydrogen pipeline in the United States, but 95% of it is in Texas and Louisiana. And if you look at globally, it's about 85% of all pipelines for hydrogen are in Texas and Louisiana. So it's not really a ubiquitous type of an approach. And I just wonder your views about hydrogen hubs and large production units around the country for hydrogen fueling stations, the production of power from hydrogen as opposed to natural gas, or natural gas and hydrogen mixtures that would go into natural gas combined cycle facilities today. I suspect that's also going to be a big part of the transition. What's your sense of where the rest of the country might be on something like that?
Boy, let me just say one thing about the fickle nature of the American consumer and citizen, which is we think this is all great until you build something on anything we own or somewhere near us. And even though there's a lot of non-support for oil pipelines, but we're trying to get large-scale transmission lines that carry renewable power moved from the place where the renewable power is to demand loads to replace other fuels that are dirtier, and people fight that just as hard. So people don't like pipelines and power lines, and I get it. Look, if somebody's going to build one across my yard, I'd be the same. I'd be like, no way, put that pipeline across my yard. I don't want it. But there is a natural pushback to more equipment and more pipelines. And so when you think about what that means for decarbonization, if people want to, as a goal that sometimes comes alongside, sometimes kind of battles against it, they also want sort of less disruption of less prevalence of energy in their life, right? They don't want to see the equipment. They don't want to see substations. They don't want to see all of this. You have to start thinking about, well, what does that mean? Well, it probably means that the idea of a hub for production of hydrogen in one big centralized place and with carbon capture close by is probably a good thing, right? Produce a lot of it. That's what happens on the Texas Gulf Coast in Louisiana, is there's a lot of property nobody loves too much. So you have, a lot of refineries, petchem facilities. I mean, it's really just a refinery hubbling, that pipeline. And that's why it's there is you need a lot of volume of hydrogen. It's really tough to handle. So better to have a pipeline, and you're going to produce a lot of fuels. And so it runs that length. I don't think the nation is going to be crisscrossed by hydrogen pipelines. Why would you? We already have natural gas pipelines. You already can bring the fuel to make the hydrogen most of the places it needs to go. You just have to get a map and figure out whether you can have the CO2 there, or you're going to have to build a lot of CO2 pipes to get it, the CO2 away and get it in the ground. So I think there'll be hub solutions to try to create hydrogen in centralized places and not transport the CO2 very far. But you still have to figure out, where are we taking this? How are we going to get the hydrogen from A to B? And so those are going to be tricky issues. But if they're tricky issues, if we double the amount of renewables and we have a bunch of high transmission, energy lines. So it's just a thorny issue, and there's a balance in different communities and different rights of way. And so we're going to have to come muddle through, like we have in the energy business for a very long time, and try to balance those interests with the needs and wants of consumers to have abundant, low cost and now low carbon energy.
I can't help but reflect on one of the comments that you made, and it's something that's sort of stuck in my craw, frankly, for the last 20 years. And that is 13 states in this country produce about 85% of the energy that's consumed in this country. So we've got 37 other states that aren't self-sufficient. They're quite consumers, I'll tell you, and nothing's slowing that down. And by the way, they don't want to pay a nickel more for anything, but they certainly have a nice way of wagging their finger at Texas and Louisiana about how we ought to be making our energy down here. But I'm sorry for that aside. I couldn't help but make that comment because it drives me crazy. We talk about technology changes, Tom, thinking about how the market's shifting and where it's going. And I mentioned the concept, and again, you could reflect on this. Do we see hydrogen for power generation? It's more than just hydrogen fueled vehicles, but do we think that fuel substitution along with natural gas is something that the nation's looking at? And how do you see the change of technology in playing out at this stage?
Well, there are a couple different answers to that question, Chuck, when you refer to power generation. We've definitely seen some projects where companies like MHI, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and others are undertaking the development of thermal generation projects, like the ACES project in Utah, for example, where they've converted coal or gas-fired, but they've converted coal generation, for example, to a gas generator that has the ability to slowly over time burn hydrogen. They're going to start with natural gas, and they're going to wean themselves off of natural gas over time and then burn hydrogen. And New Fortress Energy has done a similar thing at a project in Ohio as well. And so those projects anticipate greater availability of hydrogen over time in order to fuel those power generation assets. Another thing you can look at, another type of power generation, is hydrogen used as fuel, as energy storage. So if you have excess power from a renewable project, for example, you can produce hydrogen, which can later then be reconverted back to energy when it's needed, when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. Right now, we've seen some statistics that show that hydrogen for energy storage in the short term, and by short term I mean less than 3 or 4 days, is less efficient than things like lithium-ion batteries and pumped hydro, et cetera. But once you get out past 3 or 4 days, hydrogen looks pretty good as a long-term energy storage solution. It's still not as cost-effective as, for example, a combined cycle natural gas plant with carbon capture. But if you're having difficulty, as you might in some states that are the finger waggers that you mentioned, Chuck, building a new thermal generation in that state, then hydrogen as a energy store is a viable alternative. So those are the kind of the two ways that I think of this hydrogen in terms of power generation, and we're already seeing those projects being developed now. I've heard some critics say that they don't think that those projects for the thermal generation are ever going to be converted to hydrogen, but I would be surprised if they weren't. I think over time we're going to see the whole hydrogen economy really have legs, and there's going to be greater availability of hydrogen out there.
Let me add one thing to that, which is when it comes to technology and the role, what can technology do and how is it going to impact the likely outcomes? We already see people blending hydrogen into natural gas and burning it and decarbonizing natural gas in the process. Good. That's it's a niche solution, but it's real. The real home run here is teal hydrogen. I think just my own feeling is that what that is you're basically using the traditional process. Instead of SMR, you're typically using ATR, but very similar sort of reaction, that you're creating using natural gas, and you're creating hydrogen. But instead of getting CO2 that goes up in the atmosphere, you're going through another process and you're creating carbon black. So physical black carbon. And the thinking has always been that takes a lot more energy. It's technically possible. There's a number of small companies working on it, but I've heard from a number of players that it is getting more and more possible. All right, that is a huge game changer. No more pipelines, no need to take it away, no need to put it in the earth, right? It might have a higher cost level, but that just means your customer base for it is slightly different, right? People that can't get this solution don't want that solution, right? I mean, there's mixes of customers for whom neither green hydrogen nor blue hydrogen is a great possibility, but this might be. But I've also heard that, because carbon black is quite a handy little product, you can sell it and use it for a lot of things. You can use it for carbon neutral tires if you want. And you can use it to, you can use it in industrial process. You can also put it in cement. It's not toxic. So the fact that you can create hydrogen and you have almost zero net carbon to the atmosphere, and you use natural gas, which already it gets distributed pretty much everywhere that you might want to produce hydrogen, it's a home run. So that's a place where technology has been, I think, could play a gigantic role, and that could really unlock hydrogen production and the hydrogen economy.
Well, I think, Jason, that what you told me is that you've heard that the folks you were talking to said that the value of that carbon product, rivals or exceeds the hydrogen produced.
Yeah, it's certainly, no matter what, you're cutting into the cost of hydrogen, making hydrogen when you create a product you can sell. And so, everything works on a small scale, and on a large scale, we'll see how it works. But I think it's quite exciting, and I think that's very different than any discussion 20 years ago.
I think just real quick to harken back to the question you asked earlier, Chuck, about kind of how the market's going to develop. Everything we've talked about here so far, I mentioned frothy seas earlier, right? If you compare what's happening in this incipient clean hydrogen market with more established markets, like, for example, the liquefied natural gas market, right, where there are obviously variations on a theme, but the market is pretty well defined in terms of models about what drives the market and what drives the value and what drives the production of LNG in the market. With hydrogen, everybody out there has a little bit different view on what their value proposition is, and depending on where you are, what makes the most sense in terms of development. So everybody's taking in many cases a completely different approach to producing the same molecule, right? And so it's going to be a real, like I said, we're going to have a lot of variation in terms of approaches, project models, and even end uses. And that's what I think is so interesting about where we are in this space right now.
You know, we had a question that was posed about legal and commercial trends. And I'm wondering if that's just specific to hydrogen, or maybe more broadly, some of the things that you guys have talked about here in terms of pipelines and accessibility, in terms of CCUS and the ability to actually implement that, whether it's transporting CO2 or frankly, the whole regulatory regime around CO2 injection and storage and closing that loop. Can you, I mean, obviously you're dealing with that every day in terms of legal and policy issues. What would you identify as your tailwinds and your headwinds, perhaps, in terms of making this hydrogen economy a reality?
Wow, we're gonna need like another hour and a half to discuss this. But I would say in terms of where we see developments that need to occur on the legal and regulatory front. You know, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act certainly established, you know, pretty substantial spending for hydrogen and carbon capture, and provided for a lot of pilot projects, R&D funds, even set up, directed the secretary to establish, you know, hydrogen hubs, several hydrogen hubs around the country, but it didn't really address the regulatory framework in the United States for the siting and transportation of hydrogen, and that's something that it's clear that Congress is thinking about. A senator sent a note to Commissioner Glick a few weeks ago, asking what the FERC thought of its authority, what saw its authority over hydrogen transportation was, and the FERC answered, the chairman answered, you know, they have the authority to regulate hydrogen in a blend of natural gas, but pure hydrogen they don't. And they've also done some, done some things with PURPA and establishing some hydrogen fuel cells as qualifying facilities under PURPA, but there's really no siting authority for hydrogen or ammonia pipelines on a national or federal level, and that needs to be done. In terms of commercial developments, I think what we're seeing, which is one more thing, is that the carbon capture permitting process Jason mentioned is like 6 years right now, right? That's certainly getting quicker, but much needs to be done to streamline that process. And what will help is if more states take primacy over the permitting process for Class 6 permanent sequestration wells. That's something that right now, North Dakota and Wyoming have primacy. I think Louisiana is looking to follow them in pretty short order. But more and more states need to take that primacy to streamline those application processes and take it off EPA's desk.
As is Texas, I might add, Tom. We're moving in that direction as well. Yes.
Excellent. In terms of the commercial developments, I think that what we're going to see develop in the low carbon hydrogen and low carbon ammonia front are contractual mechanisms to help facilitate transactions of green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, and ammonia in a market where, you know, the commodities, ammonia or hydrogen, are indistinguishable based upon their production method, right? So if you have a kilogram of gray hydrogen and you have a kilogram of green hydrogen and a kilogram of blue hydrogen, they all look the same, you know? So they're going to need to be environmental attributes that are connected to or produced along with the production of low carbon hydrogen that can be transferred along with the commodity produced, and in many cases actually separated from that commodity so that they can be traded and provide more liquidity to the market. And that's something that you've seen in the renewable power markets with RECs, for example, right? So you can actually green up any type of electricity production by buying a REC to associate that with any type of power. It's just that that REC cannot be double counted. So if you produce a megawatt of power from a wind facility, you can sell that REC to somebody getting power from producing power from a coal facility, and that sort of greens up the coal production. But then you can no longer sell the power from the wind turbine as renewable power. We're going to see similar developments, I believe, in the hydrogen space, and you're already seeing that in Europe. They have what's called a certified program, which is a terrible pun, but the whole point there is to provide a certificate of origin for low carbon hydrogen. You're going to see that here, and it's going to help really provide liquidity in the market.
And I think, to give one concrete example of that may be helpful. So if Japan wants to import ammonia production occurs a lot around the world. They can burn the ammonia directly. They're developing power systems that'll burn ammonia directly. So no need to convert it back to hydrogen. Or you can convert it back to hydrogen. You can burn the hydrogen or use the hydrogen, whatever you want to do. But if they're the drivers for one of the countries really going to drive clean, they call it clean ammonia, which is green or low carbon hydrogen plus nitrogen. So if they're one of the ones, does it make more sense to produce it in a place like the Gulf Coast of Texas, where good place to produce it, low cost natural gas, production facilities, ammonia loading facilities already exist, and then to ship it halfway around the world to Japan, unload it there? Or does it make sense for them to pay for it to be produced in the US, the low carbon ammonia, but then they sell it in the US just as ammonia? They don't take the low carbon benefit. They take that little passport for low carbon that's created, because ammonia is ammonia is ammonia. Like, you got to know its origin, its backstory. You have no idea whether it's low carbon just by looking at it. But they strip off that benefit. They don't use it here. And they just attach it to a cargo that's coming like from Indonesia or somewhere in Asia and going to Japan. Does that make more sense globally so that you're not shipping things all the way around the world? The answer is, of course, it makes sense. And whether we're going to get an international regime or that would combine the national regimes of various countries and would come alongside, GHG protocols and other things that are governing the low carbon future, are we going to get a rational answer that encourages that very smart trade, right? That trade-off. And then that would allow more investment to come to places that can best produce hydrogen rather than going to places that are close by but more expensive or poorer producers of low carbon hydrogen. So Tom was talking about that in terms of, contractual arrangements, but and what you can do by contract is great. But the people in Japan want to get credit for the fact that that's low carbon hydrogen. So there's some interplay with government regulation and really even international convention and treaty. And I've heard rumblings about this coming out of COP26, that there's, looking at ways to harmonize these different regimes and harmonize the classifications of low carbon and what kind of documentation, registration, and gets into things like blockchain and how you store the passport for how you develop the low carbon and how it can be certified and audited and that sort of thing. So it's a big issue, to get it moving. I think, as Tom said, until then, contractual counterparties who want to get things done will just do it by contract, and they'll each work in their own jurisdiction in a bilateral trade to make it work. Eventually, it will work better. If you really want it to be a big deal and want it to go global, it'll work better if there's an international framework that harmonizes these different regimes.
Yeah, and blockchain and NFTs and crypto are going to be a huge part of it. And I don't know if you know this, Chuck, but the secret to making a small fortune in the NFT and crypto market is you start with a large fortune.
Hopefully not in the hydrogen market, Tom.
Yeah, exactly.
Jason, I got to go back to what you're talking about. I find that whole concept certainly understandable. I would ask the question of you both. I mean, after we're done with that academic description of how it all works and cross-border trade agreements and the world working in harmony together for this, how close to that reality are we really today? And do you see evidence that we're moving in that direction, really?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said,
Okay.
they already have the certificates of origin in Europe, right? And the idea of these, as Jason described them, as little passports, you know, is the concept is widely developed and deployed in the renewable power market, you know, the RECs, right? When you start to have cross-border transactions with these commodities, you know, Jason's right. A lot of things come into play in terms of regulations and other policies and so forth. And industry is going to need to get out in front of that. It's going to be really important for the industry to get out in front to determine how you quantify and qualify the measurement and the low carbonness of all of these products. And that's something that is happening in other industries where they're also looking at greening up their operations. You have industry trade groups that look carefully at this and have tried to take a leading role in establishing standards that get out in front of the regulators, because some types of standardization is going to be necessary in order for it to work well. And like I said, this happened, you know, in the rec market and so forth in North America. And we'll see it happen in these markets as well.
Chuck, if you get enough lawyers interested in something, you can get it fixed. No problem.
Well,
We'll take care of
I got a feeling there's a joke in there somewhere, isn't there, Jason?
Nope. No, look, I mean, if you'd have told me 10 years ago that I was going to be really sort of have a lot of clients in a very fast growing area in, you know, carbon capture and hydrogen in a low carbon economy, I probably wouldn't have really believed it. And even 3 or 4 years ago, the pace of change was not apparent. But we're an energy law firm, and Tom and I are energy lawyers. And if the goal of the people investing and participating in the energy markets is to produce low carbon energy, we're on board. But we've had to move quickly because the pace of change is quick. And this has required, you know, more staying on top of, you know, rapid developments in technology and contracting and government policy and regulation. It's this whole web is very complicated. And that means it won't be cheap or easy. Despite what people promise, none of this will be cheap or easy. But I, for one, believe decarbonization, both within the US and certainly outside, is not doing anything but blowing at gale force. And I don't see it letting off anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, Chuck. And you say you never want to hear your lawyer or your doctor say that something is very interesting.
Right.
Well, you know, to me, what's interesting is this sort of dichotomy. We've got industries and large enterprises feeling shareholder pressure and investor pressure and the global court of public opinion, and all these things are pressuring these drives toward net zero. And yet, I'm sure the next time you go to Starbucks to go inside to get your coffee, you'll notice that there's people 7 deep in line in the drive-through, idling their vehicles, drinking their latte and texting, and they've got a bumper sticker that says, "I care about the environment." And then I wonder to myself, okay, so is this translatable to the general consuming public? And we've got a few minutes here, and I'd like both of you to reflect on that difference. I see a big difference. Are people talking about it and really ready to make that investment, if you will, sacrifice as a consumer for decarbonization? Or do they simply expect the magic to happen by companies that are going to invest money, but, oh, by the way, not charge them anymore for their products? So I'd be interested in both of your opinions on that topic.
We're service providers to an industry, right? But my personal view is it's the business of the energy industry to develop projects and products that customers want. Customers have very high demands. Our clients have extremely high demands, right? And they want them to be met. And there will be a bill that comes due, because I think that's a lot of what's been said is a blend of in the future, things will be really much cheaper and it'll be the same as now. But there's a lot of investment that has to occur between now and that future, right? So you can get there by taxing. I mean, certainly the cost of getting miles per gallon up in automobiles has been done by government fiat, right? And it's driven up costs of automobiles. Okay, you can get there by incentives. You can have somebody else pay for it. But I don't think it's up to the consumer to come up with the energy future or to lower their demands, even if those demands are totally in conflict with their lifestyle, right? I mean, if the customers want low carbon fuel, it's up to the energy business to deliver low carbon fuels. And I think the energy business will. There will come a point where someone cannot subsidize some of this stuff and the cost will be substantial and long-term, like, regridding buildings so they run on hydrogen, backup hydrogen batteries, right? That's just a different kind of future. And it's a very long-term one. It's very pricey. When will this happen? I don't know, but it'll happen over a period of time. I do believe that if customers want it, eventually they will get to bear the bill of it somehow. And the energy business has proved itself amazingly reliable and adaptable and willing and able to meet those concerns. Not for free. It will never be for free, but I think I have great confidence in our clients and their ability to meet those concerns.
Yeah, I think that the rhetoric out there about net zero and changing basically our economy, the way our economy runs, is, I don't want to say overheated. It's incredibly ambitious. If you listen to what the talking points are in terms of the goals for reaching net zero, it is a shift unlike anything that's ever been done in human history, frankly, in terms of the type of shift. However, that ambition is there. There are going to be those on the vanguard that are willing to pay those costs, right? And if you think about what has reduced a lot of carbon emissions in fairly recent history, it's technological advances that made things cheaper, right? And so we're one of the great capabilities of us as a society globally and as human beings is our ingenuity. And we always surprise ourselves at the way that we're able to come up with cheaper ways of doing things better, And I think we're going to start to see the technology. We've already seen the technology come down. And with those advances, we're going to probably be able to see, I'm going to be optimistic here and say we're going to be able to see ourselves make those switches without too much extra cost.
Well, guys, on that optimistic note, I'd like to thank you both for a great discussion. Fantastic. Great perspectives. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, well, turn it back to you, Peter, at this point, and appreciate the opportunity to have spent the time with both of you two gentlemen. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Chuck. Great job.
Enjoy the presentation. And Chuck, I knew you would have stories, so you only had two. So
well, you be careful what you ask for, Peter. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, exactly. So Alex, are you ready with the slides?
Yes, I'm pulling them up as we speak.
So why don't we take a 1 minute stretch break while the slides come up and come back at 4:31 ET. How about that? Okay, welcome to our panel on tax incentives. And, in many respects, the hydrogen industry has been a bit of a stepchild vis-a-vis tax incentives. We'll talk about the existing incentives, but, those of us that work in the energy area know that there are enormous incentives for wind and solar and carbon sequestration. But there are only modest incentives for the production of hydrogen or the use of hydrogen. And we've had an enormous amount of excitement over the last several days with respect to the status of legislation that would increase the climate related incentives generally. And of course, part of that package includes a hydrogen production credit. So why don't we just begin by doing a little polling question. And Alex, if you can pull that up. So our polling question is, what are the prospects for enactment of a robust hydrogen tax credit in 2022? And the choices are slam dunk, feeling good about it, yeah, or when pigs fly. So please submit your answers. Okay. Well, what do you guys think? Slam dunk, 5%, right? That I would definitely say that's right. That's where I came with. Pigs fly, probably about the same. Feeling good about it, we'll see. And that seems to be the majority, and that's Barbara's favorite expression. So he gets the credit for those descriptions. So why don't we now? We're gonna come back to that question at the, and why don't we just flip to the next slide? There we go. So why don't we just take a quick look at what is there right now in the tax code with respect to hydrogen. And then after that, we'll go into what is being proposed. And then once we kind of just do some table setting, we'll let Tim Urban kind of talk to us about what is the path forward. Now, let me just take a minute and introduce my panelists here. So Barbara DeMarini is a tax partner in the tax practice at Baker Botts in Houston, Texas. Her practice focuses on tax planning and structure in the energy industry, with an emphasis on tax issues related to energy transition. And in particular, she regularly advises clients regarding accessing tax incentives related to low carbon projects, including hydrogen, carbon capture and sequestration, and waste heat recovery. Okay. Our third panelist is Tim Urban, and Tim is a senior principal and the firm-wide leader of Bracewell's tax policy practice with a focus on energy tax policy. He currently represents clients interested in tax legislative issues affecting hydrogen energy, carbon sequestration, renewable electricity, biofuels, conventional energy, and energy efficiency. Now, one really important point about Tim is that he was he served as a staff associate on the House Ways and Means Committee, and that experience is in sort of inside information or access to what's going on is going to be really critical as we think about what is the path forward. So let's begin. So right now, I would say that the biggest incentive is the Section 48 tax credit for the qualified fuel cell property. Fuel cell projects can get very big, and getting a credit for those projects is something that is very much part of the planning process. There's also an advanced energy project credit for manufacturing that is related to advanced energy properties, but that's under section 48C, but all the credits have been allocated, and we'll talk about whether those credits have resurfaced in the next minute or so. There's the residential fuel cells credit under section 25D. Related to hydrogen, and particularly blue hydrogen, is the credit under section 45Q. And if you just think about the fact that with during the production of hydrogen, you might sequester CO2 to convert the hydrogen from, let's say, gray hydrogen to blue hydrogen. Well, the 45Q credit is what would make that process attractive. There is the alternative fuel cell fuel purchase credit of $8,000 and a refueling property credit. Those are for the recharging stations. It's capped at $30,000, and of course those recharging stations are very, very expensive. And then there's an alternative fuel credit for against the excise tax under sections 6426 and 6427, but it only applies to liquid hydrogen, and most of the hydrogen that we've been talking about, in my experience, involves compressed hydrogen. Now, we've talked about the bill, that is the Infrastructure Act, and that had many incentives related to hydrogen, but the bill does not have any tax-related incentives. So let's go on to the next slide. However, if the Build Back Better Act ultimately is enacted, there are many incentives for hydrogen. The production tax credit would be added, new section 45Q, and Barbara's going to go through that in some detail. An alternative to the production tax credit would be an investment tax credit, basically creating parity between the production credit and the investment credit. That is, under the current law, certain industries get the production tax credit, others get the investment tax credit. There would be an investment tax credit for hydrogen storage under new section 48C6. The energy tax credit for fuel cells would be expanded to be capped at 200,000. No, it would simply be extended. Pardon me. The advanced energy project credit would be revived. There would be $5 billion added for 2023 and 2024, and another $15 billion added for 2024 to 2031. There would be credits for fuel cell vehicles ranging from $10,000 to $200,000. The alternative fuel credit would be repealed, and the carbon capture and sequestration credit, again, very important for blue hydrogen, would be increased. In fact, the increase there is dramatic. It would go from $35 and $50 a ton under current law to $85 a ton, and that would that is something that people are very excited about. And then, very importantly, and Tim may be talking about this later on, is that there would be a direct pay election. That is to say, each of these credits, which are currently available on one's tax return, would be available through basically a cash grant by the government. So, and that would apply for the PTC, the ITC, and 45Q. So the landscape would change dramatically under the Build Back Better Act. So let's go to the next slide. Barbara?
Sure. So we thought it was worth taking some time to sort of set the stage and give everyone some of the particulars about the hydrogen production tax credit that was in the Build Back Better Act, because it really is the sort of centerpiece and highlight of the tax incentives for hydrogen. There's nothing like it right now for hydrogen, and it would really provide sort of a sea change in the tax landscape for hydrogen. So the proposed hydrogen production tax credit would be in, excuse me, in section 45W. In the House version of this bill, the section was 45X. And I liked 45X a lot better. I thought 45X sounded really kind of cool, but now we've been moved to 45W. So under 45W, a production tax credit would be available that would be $1 amount per kilogram of low carbon hydrogen produced. And there's no limit on the amount. You could claim the credit for as much as you could produce, and that would extend over 10 years from the date that the production facility is first placed in service. So if you placed it in service in the middle of 1 year, all the hydrogen that you could produce through 10 years to the middle of a year, 10 years later, would be eligible for the credit. However, the credit amount as set forth in this in 45W, the credit amount depends on how clean your hydrogen production is. So it's stated as the amount of the credit turns on the kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen that is produced. And there's a phase down of the credit amount as the amount of CO2 equivalent emissions increases. The highest amount is $3 if the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements that are included in the bill are met. And in that case, that highest amount is dependent upon having either 0 or no more than 0.45 of a kilogram of CO2 equivalent emissions. It's pretty clear that the only way that you could meet that standard, that degree of cleanliness, would be if the production were production of green hydrogen. The credit value then drops to $1 per kilogram if you have a higher carbon dioxide equivalent emissions associated with it. And that dollar amount is what it is expected that's where blue hydrogen would fall. And you can see on this slide the lower amounts. If more than 6 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent are produced in connection with the hydrogen production, then no credit would be available at all. And on the next slide, a few more points about this. So in determining the amount of the CO2 equivalent emissions, the statute provides that a life cycle analysis has to be performed. And that life cycle analysis is to be determined using what's called the GREET model. The GREET model is maintained or produced by the Argonne National Laboratory, and the GREET is an acronym that refers to greenhouse gases, regulated emissions, and energy use in. And I noticed, Alex, subsequently to providing these slides, we've got to fix this because that's a typo. It's greenhouse gases, regulated emissions, and energy use in transportation, not in technologies. But the GREET model is something that people can refer to, and it's been around for a while, and there is a reference to it. But it alone is not going to answer everyone's questions about the life cycle analysis and how it's supposed to be performed. In particular, one of the questions is whether or not indirect emissions would count. So there has been a suggestion that if a particular GREET model, because the GREET 1 series model that was released in 2020 were specified in the statute or the legislative history, then we would know that indirect emissions would not count. And that is something that perhaps might be considered in later legislative developments. The other point here is that the life cycle analysis in the statute is specified as being from well to gate is how the emissions are supposed to be examined, or the scope of the emissions that are supposed to be examined. So it does raise questions, and it'll be really interesting to see how people apply, in the case of blue hydrogen, how much the carbon sequestration is going to count in the application of the GREET model to carbon sequestration. On the next slide, a couple other points. I started out by saying that the highest you can get is $3 per kilogram of hydrogen. If you look at the statute, the first number you're going to see is 60 cents. And that's because that's the basic amount of credit that you would get for the lowest emissions. That base amount is then multiplied by 5, so you get to $3 if you comply with the prevailing wage requirements, and you employ a specified percentage of apprentices in the construction process. So that's something that people are going to have to follow closely to get this credit. And then there's also a provision that would reduce the credit amount in the case of facilities that have financing by tax-exempt bonds, municipal bonds, or government grants. And that's nothing personal against hydrogen. That provision, a similar provision, is included in the Build Back Better Act for almost all the clean energy credits. So, but it's worth pointing out. Let's see, on the next slide, we have a couple of technical issues that come up every time people start looking at the PTC for hydrogen and thinking about how it would work. And the first question that they say is, well, can I get the production tax credit for hydrogen, but also can I take an investment tax credit for my investment in the hydrogen facility? And the proposed legislation is very clear that it would be for a particular hydrogen facility, you would have to elect between the production tax credit that you get over time as hydrogen is produced, or the investment tax credit based on your investment. Then the next question that comes up is, well, can I get both the production tax credit for the hydrogen production, but in the case of blue hydrogen, can I also get the 45Q tax credit for carbon capture and sequestration? The BBB would prohibit 45W if 45Q is claimed by, and it says by any taxpayer. So that question is being answered in the negative in the legislation as drafted. And then the third question that comes up is, in the case of green hydrogen, we've got our hydrogen facility and we've got the wind farm or solar farm that's providing the renewable power for the hydrogen production. So could I take the hydrogen PTC and also take a credit for my renewable energy? In other words, take a production tax credit under Section 45 for the renewable power produced, or an investment tax credit under 48 for my investment in the green, in the renewable facility. And the BBB does not, there's no statement that says that's precluded. And in fact, there is a provision that actually encourages the ability to take both the production credit for the hydrogen facility and a credit for the renewable facility, because it clarifies that a question that comes up with respect to taking 45 for renewable energy is that that you're not eligible for the 45 credit if your sales of power are to a related party. And so there's a special provision in the Build Back Better Act that would call off that rule and say that we're going to deem those sales to be to non-related parties in the case of hydrogen, sales to a hydrogen facility, indicating quite clearly that there's an intent that both types of credits could be available. Okay, and then a couple more technical issues I think are on the next slide. So a question that came up and that was much discussed in the sort of negotiations and lead up to development of this legislation as it moved through the House and moved through the Senate was whether or not existing facilities, let's say you've got a hydrogen facility, you're producing hydrogen today, but you think that you can modify it, retrofit it, do something to make it produce qualified clean hydrogen, maybe adding carbon capture, maybe doing something to make it green. But if you do that, would you then be able to get in on this new production tax credit? Or are you precluded and just out of luck because you already existed and I've already been producing hydrogen? So new section 48WD4 would allow the modified facilities to come into the new current, the proposed new production tax credit for hydrogen, which is a great thing and would obviously encourage producers to consider how they could modify their facilities to make clean hydrogen. Then another question that's come up is whether or not, and that isn't answered on the face of the proposed legislation, is whether or not RECs, renewable energy credits, can be used to satisfy the environmental performance requirements. So we just described how you have to do this life cycle analysis, and then you have to see what your CO2 equivalent emissions are. But what if you go out and you buy a renewable energy credit from a wind farm? Could that REC, since you've done that, could you then say, oh, look, now I should be considered to be a cleaner hydrogen facility for purposes of the credit? And that's an open question right now. And I think that is all that I needed to say to set the stage for some so for all the always interesting views of Tim Urban.
Oh, and just before we do that, Barbara, can I just go back to the last slide right there? And this existing facilities point is coming up a lot in the proposed legislation because, you know, if credits increase, people want, like for under 45Q, people want the higher credit amount.
Right.
So that is an open question under the proposed legislation. Now let's go back to slide 5, if you don't mind, Alex. And just to go over the comment about blue hydrogen, and you notice that there is such a drop off between the $3 credit and the $1 credit. That is a point of controversy. The folks that want to use or produce blue hydrogen would like that to be a little bit more evenly spread. People have described this as the cliff effect. And perhaps Tim will be talking about that when he gets going. So let's turn the floor over to Tim.
Thanks, Peter. I didn't bring those points out, but you're absolutely right. The modification thing is a big deal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, Tim.
Thanks very much. And it's a real privilege and honor to be part of this webinar and this panel. I guess I should start off by confessing that my response to the audience question, had the panelists been allowed to vote, would have been feeling good about it, which I realize is somewhat counterintuitive based on the recent news articles wherein Senator Manchin clearly stated he's not supporting the bill. As you know, the Senate Majority Leader and the President need 50, not 49, but 50 Democrats to vote for the bill to move it out of the Senate. And that seemed to be kind of, to some people, a fatal blow. I'll explain more towards the end of my presentation why I don't think it's necessarily unrecoverable, but I guess I'll just start off by saying, notwithstanding the current Sturm und Drang in the press, with people shaking their fists and expressing very strong opinions, I think that, with a cooling off period, I think there's an opportunity for this package to come back together. I think there's an opportunity for over $300 billion in clean energy credits to be approved. And I specifically think that now is the exact right time for the hydrogen economy and the clean hydrogen tax incentives. So that's kind of setting the stage, if you don't mind. And then I had a few kind of points based on the work that our clients, a number of companies that intend to make hydrogen, and trade associations that are involved in representing companies that are in the hydrogen sector, especially the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association, that may be insightful because, FCHEA, the association, has been in the room kind of from the very beginning, talking to these congressmen and senators and administration officials, and some of the insights may prove, interesting. So first of all, I just want to note that as we pick up the paper document of the Build Back Better title on clean energy and clean hydrogen, what you're looking at, in my opinion, is the tip of an iceberg. The visible part would be the statutory writing on the page. I think that when presuming a bill is approved, I think that the staff will have a very copious amount of language that will not be statutory language, that will be designed to provide legislative intent to the IRS and Treasury officials who will subsequently be working on the guidance. So first of all, you have to kind of understand that you're looking at just a piece of the overall puzzle. With regard to the existing tax incentives, I think you guys hit it perfectly on the head. Since 1992, there's been a very robust wind credit, and similarly, there's a very robust ITC for solar property. And I think we've seen that taxation drives behavior. When investors believe there's strong federal support, they buy in. Hydrogen has not had that at all. There's kind of a small balkanized collection of bits and pieces, but nothing that is really game changing in my opinion. I would just note with regard to 48 Cap C, that this is not a durable credit. The last time the Congress, put a new tranche of money into 48 Cap C, it was denuded really quickly. The joke was, I remember in the accounting firms, that the definition of a bad corporate tax director is someone that does not have an application into Treasury for an allocation of 48C credits. So these get wiped out pretty quickly. With regard to the statement at the bottom of the slide, we talked about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It didn't have a suite of hydrogen tax incentives. This is where the infrastructure of congressional procedure really affects the evolution of federal policy and energy. Right now, we're in a situation where if the president wants to move energy tax incentives, he can either A, use this quote unquote reconciliation procedure where he only needs 50 votes, or he can not use the reconciliation procedure and move through regular order where he needs 60 votes. And since there are not 60 Senate Democrats, that would mean that he would have to deal with Senator Mitch McConnell, the minority leader. That I think the bottom line is just that if the president wants a big, bold, robust, clean energy transition, climate change bill, he needs to use this budget reconciliation process, which of course continues to make Senator Manchin kind of a linchpin. Moving on to the incentives that are proposed, just a couple of editorial comments to help people understand how we got to where we are. When you look at the clean hydrogen PTC and ITC, these were drafted patterned on basically the wind credit, where you can take either a PTC for 10 years of wind production per facility, or you can choose to make a one-time election and elect into that ITC regime. But very importantly, and this is where I think there's some genius, and I would lay some credit to the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association and their members, is that this proposal was sort of very different from previous generations of energy tax proposals in that it's what's called tech neutral. If you read 45W, you will never see the tax credits being allocated on the basis of a name of a certain technology or the zip code in which a company was incorporated or any of those old school things. Basically, the rule was, and Senator Carper gets a lot of credit for this too, and Chairman Wyden for that matter. The rule is that if you can meet one of these various clean hydrogen environmental performance standards, you get a credit. And the idea was to be what we jokingly call ecumenical, meaning that, there are these different communities of companies and think tanks and environmental groups that are pushing various technologies. And so instead of having a contest to see who hires the best lobbyists or who hires the most lobbyists, what we're going to say is anybody whose technology meets these certain thresholds gets a credit. And if you do better, you get more credits. So I think that's, something that's, very significant and interesting. With regard to the ITC for hydrogen storage, there's kind of a story here that I think, some of the tax lawyers might be interested in. Originally, the storage property was built into the clean hydrogen and ITC piece, meaning that if you wanted to get a ITC for hydrogen storage property, you had to elect into the clean hydrogen investment credit regime, right? But by the House made the decision to take the hydrogen storage property out of the clean hydrogen ITC and put it into the Section 48 as its own piece in the energy storage compartment. And so I think there's some opportunity for tax planning here for taxpayers who may wish to take the PTC rather than the ITC, but there's also a storage piece of their business plan. There may be a way to kind of coordinate that, whereas previously they would have been stuck with a sort of either or choice. Either take the PTC or take the ITC. If you take the PTC, you're sort of out of luck on the storage property. So I just wanted to point that as kind of a neat dynamic. With regard to the...
I was just going to say, at what point in time did that switch happen? Because there wasn't, it was, I'm trying to remember if that was in the House, but not, and then it came into the Senate.
That happened after the Senate Finance Committee voted on the Clean Energy for America Act, and before the House Ways and Means Committee marked up their basically their Build Back Better committee draft.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So another interesting kind of behind the scenes thing is that the alternative fuel credit piece, as I think Peter pointed out, is not commonly used, but the congressional officials did not want the industry to have the option of taking both a clean hydrogen production credit and a fuel credit basically on the same hydrogen. So that's where that repeal came from. It was sort of a deal with the devil. If you take the new PTC, you got to let the Congress repeal the alternative fuel credit. So with regard to carbon capture and sequestration, I think that we've already sort of implied this. I'll say I think that all of the rates and the fine print with regard to 45Q and the rules, the jury is still out. Presuming that this package goes forward, in my opinion, I think it's unlikely to go forward without Senator Manchin's, imprimatur, his fingerprints on the package. He tends to be a strong proponent of carbon sequestration. So it's entirely possible that there will be additional changes to not only 45Q, but also rules affecting 45Q as we go forward. And nobody knows what that is. So, and then similarly with direct pay, currently it's available for a very broad sort of panoply of the clean energy technologies, but it's not clear whether at the end of the day that will still hold up. There are anecdotal stories that there is at least one member or members who have suggested that maybe direct pay should be available for the most nascent and immature energy technologies, but not all of them. So if anyone's, feverishly working up business plans and deal papers, just be aware that it's not necessarily a done deal that everybody's going to get direct pay. Moving to the next slide that talks about the details of the hydrogen PTC.
Tim, on that point, so
Sure.
It's possible that direct pay may not be available to, let's say, wind or solar. Is that what the situation may be?
Yeah, I mean, this is all sort of rumor intelligence, so I don't want to put it forward as factual, but I think one point of view is that commercially settled technologies where there's very broad market penetration, like wind or solar would come to mind, that they would not necessarily be eligible for direct pay, but that a nascent technology, like for instance, I guess green hydrogen comes to mind, right? That those would still be eligible. Now, again, that's not a position of Bracewell. That's just something that some members and staff have kicked around. I have no idea what the end result will be, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there that there's still thoughts going on about how that direct pay will be apportioned. I do think there's some interesting comments with regard to looking at the proposed PTC and the tranches of environmental performance, the CO2 versus the amounts. I know we were talking earlier about this quote unquote cliff effect. Just to give people a little background, these numbers were not the original numbers that were proposed by the hydrogen sector. It's a fact that hydrogen has, there's certain aspects of hydrogen energy that have become politically controversial. There are environmental groups on the one hand that are almost violently opposed to carbon sequestration and using fossil fuel feedstocks, no matter how clean the ultimate result is. There are large US multinational Fortune 10 kind of companies who very much want to make sure that their technologies are in the mix for these clean hydrogen credits. The original numbers that I was involved with in FCHEA were actually a little bit more compressed. The difference between the top $3 number and the other numbers was less. What happened was over a period of months, a number of senators, very influential senators and congressmen went to the various tax committee chairs and Senate leaders and complained that they would not support clean hydrogen unless these numbers were adjusted. And so there was this sort of seesaw set of skirmishing that went on over time. And these numbers represent, what the hydrogen champions could sort of hold on to without having the whole package scuttled. Now, again, these numbers may change again before we see a bill, go to the president's desk. But I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that it wasn't like people sat in a paneled room somewhere at a restaurant smoking cigars and decided to create this big differential between the $3 number and the other numbers. That's not the way it
Yeah, and I kind of remember Mike Morris circulating an article to me about somebody saying dirty hydrogen gets tax credits. That was probably the group you're talking about.
Well, there are letters that have gone to the Hill in the recent past that have been subscribed by a vast number of environmental groups that have been very, used very strong rhetoric. And, I guess my final point with regard to this slide is that the thing that kind of is a overlying dynamic with regard to everything you see on these slides is that in this budget reconciliation process, What you're looking at is a technical issue being resolved by political dynamics entirely within the Democratic Party. There is not one single Republican senator who's going to vote for this package, this Build Back Better package. Because they're not voting for the package, there's a rule about, people jokingly say, you know, talking about take the dough and vote no. And you're not allowed to take the dough and vote no on a package like this. If you want to have an influence on the package, you have to vote for the package or potentially vote for the package. So a lot of the senators who potentially represent conventional energy states, who would be, in some people's minds, the most focused on clean hydrogen that could be made from conventional energy feedstocks, are not voting for this bill. And therefore, they don't have the opportunity to have their input regarded as heavily as members, Democratic senators who are probably more environmentally sensitive.
And so those people are relying on Senator Manchin, basically, in a sense. Yeah.
To some degree, yeah. Yeah, to some degree, yeah. So I would also note that with regard to the 10-year period for tax credits provided for clean hydrogen, taxpayers have spoken to congressional officials and Treasury officials, hoping that eventually when the regs come out, there will be a quote unquote kind of increments of power rule, which basically says that if you have a one unit facility, you place it in service, you get 10 years of credits, but then you increase it to a 2-unit facility where it's now you've doubled its capacity. They want to have some ability to get an additional 10 years of credits for the new capacity, not the amalgam of the old and the new, but just the new quote unquote increment of power. And there's already, for those tax nerds in the audience, there are already rules like that that apply to renewable electricity power sector facilities.
Right.
Kind of jumping ahead to the slide that says additional features. With regard to labor and apprenticeship multipliers, and I kind of feel sorry for Barbara. The language in the Build Back Better that creates this sort of set scale of base credits and then bonus credits, it is in some people's minds convoluted. The only point I would make is just that the Build Back Better package, before it goes to the Senate floor, must go through something called the Byrd Bath, which refers to Senator Robert Byrd, former senator from West Virginia. It's part of the budget reconciliation process. During that Byrd Bath, a number of provisions may get knocked out of the bill because they don't conform to the budget reconciliation rules, which say that these basically have to be tax provisions or revenue provisions that result in an increase and decrease in revenue. The labor and apprenticeship rules, in theory, they may not survive this Byrd Bath process. So, I think we have to see, to the extent that the entire bill does move, we have to see what happens when the bill emerges from this scrub with the Senate parliamentarian.
Do you know what the motivation was on that?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Isn't the raison d'etre, the reason for being for the labor and apprenticeship rules is, in fact, to meet the Byrd requirements? I mean, that's why they're there, isn't it? Or did I not understand that correctly?
I think the underlying raison d'etre for the labor and apprenticeship requirements is to satisfy an organized labor constituency who are big Democratic voters.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, we'll have to see. There's a cottage industry in Washington that involves making predictions as to how the parliamentarian will rule. I think that, we'll just have to see. I'm not making any statement one way or the other. It's just, the bill may be slightly different when it comes out of the process than when it went in. So I'll just have to see what's there. One note I want to make about, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But is that the Senate parliamentarian?
It is the Senate parliamentarian.
Okay.
The Byrd rule is a Senate rule.
Okay.
With regard to the tax exempt bond reduction, I just want to point out that this rule is actually a taxpayer friendly reduction in what is normally known as 45B3. The underlying rule had to do with subsidized energy payments that the taxpayer gets, and you have to basically back out some value of your tax credits if you've gotten other subsidized energy financing. This rule in 45W is actually narrower than 45B3. So this is the result of lobbying the hill to not have as many things, affect your credit.
Right.
With regard to the technical issues, we already said that the coordination rules on 45W and 45Q, the jury's still out. We just don't know what the final deal will be on that until Senator Manchin's list of items has been, discussed. With regard to the 45W and the PTC, like for instance, the wind PTC, I just want to note this is really a big deal for the potential developers of green hydrogen that anticipate using, for instance, wind energy as a feedstock, because the rule in Section 45 for wind electricity, the general rule is that you have to sell the electricity to this unrelated person. And that's basically an anti-fraud rule that they're trying to make sure that the amount that you claim you generated is the amount that you actually generated. So this ability for a taxpayer, and I'm just going to hypothetically say perhaps a large, very large utility that's got both wind generation assets and wants to co-locate a clean hydrogen facility to use that wind energy, this simplifies their deal sheet a lot, I think. So it's just something to point out. That was not an accident. There was a ton of work done by people, especially in the wind sector. Moving on to,
and the clear implication of that is that you could then get both 45W and the PTC or ITC for the wind. So yeah, I
think that well, not providing tax advice, I think that appears to be to me also. With regard to existing facilities, Barbara knows this, so I've already kind of buried the lead with her, but the existing facilities thing, that rule is a huge deal. It's a huge deal because if you think about it, a lot of the potential community of SMR generated hydrogen could or should come from SMRs that are already existing. Nobody wants to bulldoze an existing piece of property and build a new one that's identical, just because the identical one will get the credit and the old one won't, right? So there was a ton of work done with Senator Carper, Chairman Wyden, Chairman Neal, the US Treasury Department. Now, the one thing I will note is that I hypothesize that the staff are writing report language, which will provide more guidance on this rule. And I don't know whether the report language will provide more color to the service for the purpose of promulgating regulations. And I don't know whether the report language will in any way narrow the provision, which otherwise seems to be, wide open. Mm-hmm. With regard to the REX bullet that's on the slide, we already said the jury's out. There are a lot of hydrogen policy tax observers who believe that even though the bill is silent in terms of black letter law on the page, the fact that they use the GREET model allows a lot of people to infer that the REX and the book and swap kind of biogas, transactions will still be allowed. I absolutely think that this is going to be the subject of a bunch of report language of some sort. And it's really important for those taxpayers who are thinking about biogas, unless they happen to build a facility right on top of a landfill or a dairy digester, they're going to need this language, right? Because that's how you get there from here. The biogas turns into renewable natural gas, which is fungible in pipelines with natural gas. And then the taxpayer who's going to, produce the clean hydrogen uses the gas coming out of his natural gas pipeline, buys the environmental attributes for the biogas, and that's kind of how they get to satisfying the environmental performance standards. So those are a few comments, and I'm happy to interact with everybody as necessary.
Well, could you talk about the path forward then? I mean, in terms of, those are the comments. What are the variables?
Okay, so I'll just give you kind of what I believe to be the stark factual lay of the land confronting the president and the members of the House and Senate. And when I say members, I really mean Democrats, because Republicans are just completely not voting for this bill. So they're, if anything, they're doing small skirmishing acts to impede the bill using procedural, ploys and whatnot. But looking forward, the president and Leader Schumer, they basically have three options. these three options are sort of hemmed in by the nature of the congressional procedures and rules. So the first option is to continue to move forward using these so-called budget reconciliation rules, which would allow them to pass a bill on the Senate floor with only 50 votes, with the understanding that they've got to cut a deal with Senator Manchin and or Senator Sinema and the other 48 Senate Democrats. And that deal could either be something that looks just like the Build Back Better bill with little tweaks here and there. It could be taking the Build Back Better package apart and, performing fairly significant surgery and coming up with a different bill, but still moving it under these budget reconciliation rules, which allows them to basically move a bill through the Senate without any Republicans and without the fear of being filibustered, because you can't filibuster a budget reconciliation bill. So that's option one. Option two, if they choose to use a procedure other than budget reconciliation, that what's regular order, that means that any bill that goes through the Senate is going to be subject to a filibuster, and it will therefore require a minimum of 60 votes, not 50. Because there are not 60 Senate Democrats, this means they would effectively need at least 10 Senate Republicans. The way that the parties and the leaders maneuver is that if you want 10 Republicans, you're going to have to deal with the Republican leader, who is Mitch McConnell, who is, I think in most people's minds, one of the more artful and ingenious Senate tacticians of all time. I think that there's a possible deal to be had between the Republicans and Democrats this year. I think it probably focuses on using something like the tax extender package as a shell to hang other items on. As you know, there are a number of tax provisions that will expire at the end of December of this year that will require extensions. So I do think that that's a viable alternative. But because McConnell is not going to do the Democrats any favors, I think that package would be much, much, much smaller. It would not be as single-mindedly aimed at achieving democratic and progressive social and energy and climate objectives. It would require the Senate Democrats to swallow a bunch of Republican priorities that they may not want to engage on. I think on the whole, that option two is not as attractive as option one. And then the third option would be to not move a bill through reconciliation with 50 votes and not move a bill through regular order with 60 votes in the Senate, but just not move a bill. They can take bills to the Senate floor that fail. They can, make points rhetorically on the Senate floor. They can use the Republican obstructionism as fodder for election commercials, but they would end up with no clean energy package. They would end up with no extension of the child credit. They would end up with no, think of all the various quote unquote human infrastructure, social priorities that the Democrats have been talking about. None of that stuff would get done before the elections. Now, I am not a pollster, but from what I've read in the papers, I think that a complete belly flop, in 2022 by the Democrats with no achievements of any of these priorities could, I apologize, a total fail would be potentially even worse than option one or option two. So there's three options. The options are: one, kind of take their medicine and deal with Manchin; two, spurn Manchin and deal with McConnell, who will probably be harder to deal with and give them less of what they want; or three, have no legislation and then take what might be a beating or a bigger beating in the 2022 elections. So, people don't always act rationally, but I think that the rational choice here, if possible, if Manchin's open to additional negotiations, which he apparently says he is, the rational choice would be to try to get as much as they can get using option one. And I think if they do move forward in that direction, I think there's a potential deal that keeps most, if not all, of the clean energy climate stuff in this package that Barbara reviewed with us. And I think the hydrogen stuff, there's a very good chance all that stuff stays in. So, anything can happen. It always takes longer than you think it will. there will inevitably be, a period of, they say denial is not just a river in Africa. There'll be a period over the holidays where all of the actors will get to, performatively work out all their emotions in the national media. But it could be next year in 2022, there still could be a Build Back Better package. And that's what I'm kind of betting on.
And so would you say any timelines that, like, is it the State of the Union, President's week or President's Day, or anything, that would be for people to look to or to aspire to?
There are equally viable theories running around Washington that it could be, there could be some sort of deal before the State of the Union. There are other theories that it will take some time for people to grudgingly acquiesce to some of the changes that may need to be made to the package. So, the one dynamic I will note, though, is that, the elections are in November. At a certain point, as you get closer and closer to November elections, the conventional wisdom is it gets harder and harder to get endangered members to vote for revenue increases. So, in my mind, I think that this is something that, is something that is, before the middle of the year. They got to get it done.
And maybe that's where March comes in. Yeah.
And also, Tim, do you want to just make a quick comment about if the bill were enacted, how it would apply retroactively, or what would the effective date look like in that case?
Sure. So, and that's a very good question. I think traditionally there is a long-standing precedent of providing retroactive effective dates to extensions of current law, so quote unquote tax extenders that are allowed to expire sort of by accident, right? And the idea is that there's a detrimental reliance kind of argument that tax directors and companies have made these business investments based on these things being extended, and absent some sort of coordinated statement from the tax committee chairs or the Treasury Secretary clearly stating that they're not going to be extended, that taxpayers shouldn't be the victim of congressional malfeasance. On the other hand, for quote unquote new starter issues where it's not an extension of current law, there's a separate argument that is sometimes made that if the tax provision is meant to be an incentive for future behavior, that it doesn't make sense to retroactively extend it in the past because the taxpayer, didn't get in like a Wayback Machine and know that they were going to get this tax credit, and that therefore you're basically giving a free undeserved benefit.
Yeah. Right.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left, and I think that we should run a polling question. Alex, what do you think? Oh, look, it's the same question as before. How do you like that? What are the prospects for enactment of a robust hydrogen tax credit in 2020?
See if people's answers are different now than they were.
All right, everybody, go for it.
I don't remember exactly what the percentages were for.
I think meh was.
Yeah, meh was the winner last time. So. Oh,
look at
well,
that. Look at
so
that.
Tim got people feeling more optimistic. Yeah. Or maybe people just got more religion about hydrogen from listening to all this. They just started feeling like this has got to happen. This has just got to happen. So.
Well, on that note, I think we can. I'd like to thank Barbara and Tim and Alex, and Mike Moore, and Cynthia, and Sheila for allowing us to make this presentation today. It's been a lot of fun, and I have to tell you, I learned so much from it. It's guaranteed that I'm gonna go listen back to the tapes, and that is a reminder that these programs will be on the USA website, including the materials. So you can listen to it, or you can just look at the deck. And I have a habit of doing that, on the weekend. So with that, Sheila, any parting words?
Yes, thank you so much for such brilliant thoughtful, insightful presentations, incredible learning experience. And I assume, Barbara, that it's okay if we put your materials up and out, even though it has that don't touch.
Right, no, I'm gonna fix that, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but very, very useful and a very complex subject in a very, I wouldn't say entirely understandable, because it is the tax code we're talking about, which is not intended to be understandable by anybody. But thank you so much. And thank you, Peter. And of course, to our dear friend Mike, and also to our dear members here who participated to the bitter end, and Alex Croca, who has done so darn much work on this too. So it's been an amazing experience to learn all this tax law suddenly in one fell swoop. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day now.
Bye. Have a great holiday.
Bye-bye.